All right, looks like we're recording now. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Michael. It's great to
Yeah,
see you.
good to see you too, over there on the opposite coast. Yes, everyone here, welcome. More people are coming in as we go along. If you're brand new to this is the Liars Club weekly Zoom chat. This week we're honored to have Jonathan Maberry with us. I will talk about him in just a minute. I just want to let everyone know how this works. As you can see, there is a chat. You can hit the button that says chat on the bottom, and that way you can talk to other panelists, other members who are here. We do not turn your microphones on because otherwise it's just a huge, gigantic crowd and nothing gets done. There is a question and answer point. You can put your questions over there. I would appreciate it if you would. This week we're having Ask Jonathan Anything. And the reason I did that is because Jonathan is one of the supreme experts in the field, and just about any question you can ask him, he's going to know, or at least know where to point you in the right direction. If you're not aware, I guess I could talk about Jonathan a bit, but I don't want to spend the entire hour, because if I try, it'll take an hour to go through all his accomplishments. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He is a 5-time Bram Stoker Award-winning author. He writes for comic books. He writes anthologies, short stories. He's been lecturing. He's sort of my mentor, because when I first got started, Jonathan was running the Philadelphia Liars Club. And I would go there and meet with him, and that's why we got organized with him. And we're now the Pocono Liars Club. His best known books are like V-Wars, of course, which was made into a Netflix series recently, and the Joe Ledger books, the Rotten Ruin books. And we're going to talk a little bit about that before we get into your questions, because I just want to ask a couple of quick questions. And then, folks, I wish you would type your questions in on the Q&A section, and we're going to get to those. Jonathan, tell me about V-Wars first. What happened? Why were you happy with the series, first of all?
Yeah, the series was a lot of fun. They did a good job with it. I was not involved in the writing or storytelling, adaptation.
Right.
They did a really good job with it. Great casting, and I made a lot of friends as a result of it. And very close friends now with our star Ian Somerhalder and a few of the others. As far as what happened goes, it's kind of a funky thing, because just as COVID was hitting Hollywood, a lot of companies were looking for reasons to cut. And even though it was kind of a weird thing with us, because we were number one in 130 of the 197 global markets. So our numbers were huge. So yeah, we're actually a little mystified as to why we got cut. We are shopping it elsewhere. So we expect to land, with the numbers we had, 27 million people watched the show. So we're moderately sure we're going to land somewhere else. We don't know what's going on with Netflix. We wish them well, but we all think that was a mistake. But that's Hollywood for you. Hollywood's weird.
Yeah, I was surprised, because the ratings were so good, and it was like number one on Twitter for a while, and it's getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, it was.
Is there any news on the Rotten Ruin book movies or TV show?
What was that, Michael?
Was there any news on Rotten Ruin series?
Yes, actually, the Rotten Ruin movie is moving along. It's still in the development phase, meaning it's under option. It hasn't yet gone to full purchase, but we're in a very interesting interim phase where they hired a top Hollywood screenwriter, somebody who had written one of the better selling Marvel movies, as well as some other things, and he is about halfway through writing the script. So that should be done June or July, and we're having some really excellent creative discussions, and I am involved in the creative part of this. I'm executive producer. So things are looking pretty good. I'm not going to say guaranteed, because this is Hollywood and it's a plague. So things are looking pretty good for it. So
does the fact that the plot of Rotten Ruin having to do with a sort of plague, is that going to scare people away from it?
No, because it's about life after. Really.
True.
Even though Rotten Ruin has some scary elements to it, zombies and post-apocalyptic stuff, it is ultimately a story about hope, and about how, optimism is our strongest weapon in this. The adults in the story all lost their optimism because they went through the destruction of the world. But the kids, who are the centerpiece of the story, want to have a future and expect to have a future. So it's really an optimistic story, light at the end of the tunnel sort of story. So I think it'll do well.
All right, well, let's get some questions here, because people are sending us stuff. Marianne Moore says, how would you suggest that a novice writer develop an audience for their work? Are sites like the Fussy Librarian worth our marketing dollars?
Well, there are a lot of sites. There are a lot of different ways to skin that cat. I'm a huge fan of social media as the platform in its various forms. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, Facebook, and a website. I use all of those, and I hit them all the time. And
Hmm.
that really builds an audience. My career kind of started, my fiction career at least, started right around the time of social media with Friendster and MySpace. And I've been using social media to build my career. And I've seen how social media carries that message out, makes friends, not only with colleagues, but also with bloggers, reviewers, booksellers, and also with fans, because they get to interact with you and you become real to them. And it doesn't matter if you're an absolute beginner or all the way at the top. People want the engagement with writers. So if you are engaging with them, not just trying to sell to them, but engaging with them, and that's the best possible sales marketing plan, and it's also the most fun because you actually make friends. So to me, that's a win-win. And the trick with social media, by the way, is to budget how much you do it. I budget 10 minutes out of every writing hour for social media, so it doesn't become a life-sucking black hole. And as a result, I know I'm going to hit it. And because I know it's scheduled in my day, I don't feel the constant tug to go over and check it every 5 minutes, which allows me to stay in the zone of my writing.
Well, you've talked before about how to get that energy to get the work done before, because you treat this like your job. I mean, this is like a 9-to-5 job for you as writing.
It is a 9-to-5 job.
How did you get yourself into that mindset when you were first starting?
Well, I mean, partly I blame it on the fact that I was trained as a journalist. I went to Temple University School of Journalism, learned a lot of good work habits, because a journalist doesn't wait for the news to hit him. A journalist says, okay, I gotta do this story. I gotta write it quick and dirty. I'll fix it and rewrite and deliver it on a tight deadline. And even when I started my fiction career, long before I sold my first novel, I applied that same thing where I said, okay, I'm giving myself deadlines for chapters, for drafts, for finding an agent, for everything. Everything it was on my calendar. And I approached it as if I was going to work every day. Even before this was full time, I was approaching it as if I was going to work every day. And that discipline creates the kind of routine that allows you to take time away from the stress of worrying when you're going to write, to simply saying, okay, that's my time to write, whether it's a whole day or 15 minutes, that's my time to write. So by the time I get there, I'm right in the zone. I'm not trying to fuss around with it. I know it's scheduled. And that takes a lot of pressure off, knowing that that block is scheduled. It's there. You go in, you sit down, you write. And that becomes a habit. And nothing requires habits as strongly as the writing business. I mean, they're not bad habits. They're habits of production, of promotion, of submission. Everything has a place on my schedule. And because of that, I don't feel the tugs all the time of wondering what to do. I know what to do. I have my plan. Even if what I'm scheduling is how best to do the next thing, I'll schedule research time and say, okay, well, this is the time I'm going to learn how. For example, recently I taught myself how to use Snapchat. Didn't know how to do it, didn't want to do it, but figured, well, it's really popular, so let me give it a shot. So I blocked out some time to learn how to do it. Watch some YouTube videos on how to do it, and then start doing it.
Well, you have to do a lot of research for your books too, especially because a lot of them are based on scientific possibilities, and you've got to know what you're talking about. Do you have any trouble when you want to talk to an expert in the field? Have they ever said no to you? Have they ever denied you requests?
I'm not sure that I've ever had an expert say no because I was bothering him. But more likely they would say no because they're busy. But, back when I was doing magazine features, which I did from college up until the point where I became a novelist, I was doing magazine features. Every time I needed a quote, if I needed one quote, I would reach out to 3 or 4 experts. Somebody is going to get back to me with a quote. Doesn't have to be my first choice, but they all have to be choices of relatively equal quality in terms of expertise. And I do that now too. If I'm right now, I'm researching the dark web and the global black market for a novel I'm writing. So I've sent out a slew of emails to people who are involved in that. And the way I find them is I look for people who are being quoted in news articles on the topic, because they go after the experts, track them down to whatever organization they belong to, find the contact page, reach out to them. And I do that with several and wait for someone to get back to me. And as soon as that person gets back, I do an email interview with them rather than say a voice interview, because I don't have to transcribe a voice interview. And also I don't mess up spelling or anything else. and it allows me to get the information very quickly, ahead of time. I'm already starting to do research for a project I won't be writing until the fall. So I schedule my research ahead of time and make sure that as that information comes in, I have enough lead time to be able to decide whether I understand it enough to answer follow-up questions and go deeper and so on.
Have you ever had a problem with the FBI wondering why you're asking all these questions?
Oh yes, I wanted to interview some people at General Atomics, which is a company that makes the military drones, and I reached out to the PR people and so on, and I spent a couple of very uncomfortable hours in a room with some FBI agents who, by the way, do not ever smile on the job. And they knew a lot about my past, and I'm like, wow, how the hell do you know all that? And I got cleared. I went through and I did the research, but they were not friendly. The funny thing is, about a month later, I got an email from one of those FBI agents. I'm thinking, oh crap, I'm screwed now. Turns out he was writing a novel and he wanted to pick my brain, so wanted to know if we could meet for beers. And I'm like, this is the guy who did not smile, Turns out when he's off the clock, he's friggin' hilarious. So we had a great time. He's now a friend, so. But
All right, we
I
got some questions here.
Yeah, I'm assuming I'm on watch lists, most really probably are.
Do you see changes happening in the publishing industry as a result of the pandemic?
Of course. Publishing is going through a forced evolution. There's a lot of fear that publishing is dying. It's not. It is changing. And a great example of this was a company that reached out to me today. It was a company that's a new comic book company, and they have some fairly new models on how they're working. So instead of relying on bookstore sales of their comics, they're doing things. They're pushing the ebook comics and also packages. So, like for example, if most comics are written in 4 to 6 issue arcs, when you subscribe to it, you'll get either the ebook and either a trade paperback or all 5 copies of that issue in a bundle. So you'll just simply have it sent to you. You don't have to worry about going to a store or anything, which cuts down their production costs and allows them to stay in business, operate in business in a fairly virtual way. I know with book publishers, a lot of the editors and so on are at home, working from home. My editors are all working from home at Simon & Schuster and St. Martin's and so on. And, we're rolling with it because we don't want the business to collapse. Mm-hmm. What's taking the hit right now are brick and mortar, the booksellers and so on. They're taking hits, and they're going to take some bad hits, and we're going to lose some places, and that's going to suck. But there's a new version of publishing that will emerge just as after the economic downturn in 2008, we saw significant changes in publishing. We saw the rise of quality independent publishing. We saw the rise of micro and small presses. We saw the rise of ebooks and a fantastic explosion of audiobooks because of digital downloading. Those were all changes that were forced because of the economic downturn, and they've worked out for us. So we're just simply going to continue to evolve. One thing that matters, though, some writers have a fixed view of what writing or what publishing should be, and they're bound and determined to stick to that one version. But that's like saying, I love dinosaurs. They're the dominant species. They've been a dominant species for 200 million years. Well, that asteroid had something else to say about that. And dinosaurs after the asteroid became chickens. So they evolved, and we still have chickens.
Another question. Carol Gazander says, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I've known her for long, and I don't think I've ever pronounced her name properly. She says, I remember one thing you said at StokerCon is that it's good to become known as a fiction writer as opposed to getting tagged in a certain genre. How does one go about that for your first major work?
Actually, it's pretty easy because I did that with my first major work with Ghost Rider Blues. When I had the conversation with my agent, we talked about labeling, what the genre label was, because I pitched it to her as horror. But when, before she took it out to shop, she said, well, here's the thing. Horror, doesn't have a shelf in any of the Barnes & Noble stores. There is no horror shelf. I think there's one, maybe Lehigh Valley Barnes & Noble has a horror shelf. None of the others do. Borders did, but Borders is gone. So she said, the real place to be in fiction, in horror or any genre is the fiction and literature shelves. That's where Stephen King is. That's where James Rollins is, and so on. So you want to be in place where the big heavy hitters are published, are shelved rather. So, we agreed that she should take it out as mainstream fiction that is a horror thriller. But mainstream fiction is what we sold it as. And when you look at the careers of someone like Stephen King, he has never put horror on the spine of his books. He calls himself a suspense writer. Now, it was deliberately chosen because there is no suspense shelf. Suspense is something that appears in every kind of fiction, whether it's romance or the pokey little puppy looking for his ball under the couch. It's still suspense. So calling yourself a suspense writer allows for that latitude to go anywhere. His career has been all over the place. Richard Matheson, the same thing. And Dean Koontz, a lot of these guys don't label themselves too closely in a genre label. My buddy James Rollins is a good example. I mean, he's been really, his career exploded with the Sigma Force books. Recently he just sold a couple of epic fantasy novels, which I've also done, that we'll be writing pretty soon. But they all fall under the label. I call myself, a thriller or suspense writer. He calls himself as a thriller or suspense writer. Neither of us uses a genre that locks us into one particular shelf.
And do you find that your work, here's another question from Teal James Glenn, do you find that your work dictates the genre, or do you set out to fit it into the genre when you begin?
It depends on where you are in your career. When I first started writing, I wanted to write a horror novel. I had just done research on a nonfiction book about supernatural folklore, and I wanted to write a book in which that was able to play out in fictional paradigms. But these days, when I want to write a novel, I'll pitch, I'll come up with an idea and I'll pitch it to my agent and say, I've got an idea. Here's a paragraph about it. And here's 2 other ideas I have. Which one do you think I should write? Now, I can do that now because, I'm writing my 37th novel. I know I can turn out a novel in 3 months and she can sell it and the thing will be on shelves in a year. So, and she'll sell it before I write word 1. It's a different place in my career than it was when I first started. When you're starting out, you do want to have a good idea where your book falls, only because it makes it easier to pick the agents who are more likely to have those editors on speed dial. But once you sign with the agent, you and the agent may have to strategize on how best to pitch it. Chasing a trend when you're not yet established is a mistake, because trends change like that. We've seen it happen a lot. Trend can go cold really fast. So don't chase a trend unless you're really well established and know, like great example. So early this year, January, I decided I want to pitch a epic fantasy novel. Never done epic fantasy before. Pitched it, wrote up a pitch for my agent. She took the pitch out, sold it, I think in 3 days. And, we got a really good deal on it. And the editor says, okay, I want the first book in December and I want the next book in May in that series. So bang, bang. Now, I could never have agreed to that when I started my career because it took me 3 years to write my first book. Mm-hmm. But now I know, I just put it on my calendar. I block out 3 months. During those 3 months, I will write that book because I'm at that point in my career where I know my capabilities and I know my ability to hit a deadline. But when you're starting out, focus on one book and get it right. Just really get it right. Whatever time it takes, whatever genre it falls into, write the book that's in here, and then go figure out the agent to help you market it.
I will point out that you have written fantasy before in a book called Baker Street Irregulars.
Well, funny thing
that was edited with we edited together. Yes,
that was a fantasy short story. My second fantasy short story, and that story and the other one I wrote for Operation Arcana, another anthology, were my first steps into epic fantasy. And the series I'm going to be writing is actually set in that world.
Excellent.
So even the characters who appeared in that Baker Street Irregular story will appear in my new novel, Kagan the Damned.
Well, that's good. That's what I asked you to do way back when you gave me that story. So I'm happy to hear that it's happening. I know it wasn't my choice, my words that made you do it, but I'm glad that you're doing it.
I'm glad you did, yes.
Speaking of agents, someone else is asking, how do you find an agent, especially now with everything going on?
Agents are not as hard to find as you think. My favorite way, and there are other ways to do it. I know people like agent search and query tracker and other things. My favorite way is publishersmarketplace.com. Mm-hmm. It's $20 or $30 a month. If that's, and so for some people that can be enough, a financial hit. and you're not hearing me say this, but share the login with a friend. Split the cost up. And what you can do is you can track about 90% of the book deals in publishing, not all of them. Some, like Stephen King, doesn't put his in there, but other people do, and most people do. And you're able to tailor your search. So if I was searching on epic fantasy, I could look for epic fantasy and see which agents are representing that. If I didn't already have an agent, I would find someone who's making recent sales, like recent is in the last 3 to 5 years, and they would go on my list of agents to approach. That there is no faster way to create a tailored list of agents who represent your work. Otherwise, you're doing a very scattershot approach. I base it on people who are actually making sales, not who say, I also do this. I want an agent who is making sales, because that agent will, in fact, have editors on speed dial and will know how to talk about books in that genre. I don't want to have to be part of someone's learning curve unless I really have to. So that's my favorite way to do it.
What's your opinion on self-publishing and how it's changed over the years?
Well, just so you know, I have never self-published. So, I'm talking from someone who is in the writing world. My answer to that prior to the economic downturn in 2008 would have been moderately dim, because there was so much bad self-publishing. Since the digital age, since we're able to do a lot of the work to craft a better book these days, there are a lot of freelance editors, development editors, copy editors, proofreaders. There are freelance book designers of quality, and a lot of them are more affordable these days because they're also moderating their prices because of the economic realities. But you can craft a much better book, get it better edited, and with a cover that doesn't scream self-published. And a lot of folks have done that, and there have been some superb independent books. The Martian was a self-published book, which you don't realize that. My buddy Scott Sigler, who's a #1 New York Times bestseller for his thrillers, self-publishes a whole bunch of novels called the Galactic Football League, which, by the way, he sells a ton of. And I have a bunch of friends who do self-publishing. And there's also a kind of a crossover with self-publishing called micropress, where it's 2 or 3 people who are independent. They want to publish independently, but they form a company so it doesn't look as self-serving, as it could look. And as a result, they also keep each other honest, and they're putting out some really quality books. Some of the most notable small presses started out by editors who wanted to publish their own book, and they formed a little LLC to do it. And they say, well, that worked real well. Let me get other people in there. Journalstone, I actually published with one of those companies that started out as an independent publisher, just publishing indie stuff, self-published stuff. And now, I've done a whole bunch of anthologies and short story collections with them. So my view of independent publishing has become a lot better over the years, and I greatly respect it. But there's one caution to that. If you're going to self-publish, understand that people are going to invest money and their time. So you got to respect that. Don't give them just something you had printed. Put your heart and soul into making sure it's the best quality product you can, so that you're respecting the reader, and that will show, and that will be what they talk about. They'll talk about how good an indie book it is. You don't want to be the anecdote of how slipshod it is, and there unfortunately are still a lot of slipshod. So be the person on the cutting edge of doing it really well, because that also makes you shine more brightly, and it can attract readers and a loyal fan base within independent publishing. And if you want, it becomes a great calling card if you want to go traditional.
Well, the bottom line is that a self-published book is going to be judged the same as a non-self-published book, is what you're saying. Really, it has to be at the same quality?
It should be at the same quality. Yeah, there's no reason it can't be in today's age. Unfortunately, the one thing about self-publishing is that it doesn't qualify for as many reviews with some of the bigger trades and publications, and some of the bigger awards don't. Though that's changing too, because I'm on the board of the Horror Writers Association, and we now actually allow independent books to be nominated for the Bram Stoker Awards. And in fact, we have awarded the Stoker Award to independent books. And other organizations are following suit. So it's the landscape for independent publishing is definitely changing, and it's changing for the better.
Similar, a question from one of our authors, members of the Pocono Liars Club, has been releasing her own books. She's been doing the covers like she's supposed to. She says she normally releases the paperback first and then later does the ebook. The way the world is changing, should she be releasing the ebook first, or does it matter?
I accidentally think it should be first or together, and also you should make sure that you apply to AuthorGraph. AuthorGraph is a free website that will allow you to personalize somebody's ebook. You can actually sign it and personalize it, and it's attached to the ebook file. If you're able to do that, it'll maximize your ability to sell or to attract readers to your ebooks, because they know that they can get it personalized from you, which is a big sell, and it's a big important part. And it's also, it's a nice talking point too. So yes, I think they both should come out at the same time. There's no reason not to. The only thing that should be delayed, possibly, is an audiobook, because that you may have to wait for the proceeds from the independent sales to be able to fund an audiobook through ACX or some other medium. But anytime you can do a multi-platform release, you should do a multi-platform release.
How should we as writers help build a platform while staying organic and remaining authentic? Ask somebody. Ask
Social media is the best way to do it. And the way to do it that's organic. I have never bought extra followers or any of that crap. I think it's kind of disgusting that people do that. I don't even use, I don't even boost sales too much with, or boost awareness by buying Facebook or Twitter ads. I haven't found a lot of use there. Social media really works best to build your career when you are on social media as a participant in conversations. So I don't just go on social media to promote my own stuff. I follow conversations on a lot of different threads, as much as I can, time allowing. And when I use my own platform for social media, one of the things I do is I'll start a conversation. I'll say, all right, tell me what you guys are writing. Tell me something good. Show me your pet. I mean, whatever. It's part of the engagement that allows us all to have fun on social media. That is building awareness not only of our interaction, but it's also showing that we're part of the community, proving, in fact, that we're part of the community. Because those writers who go on social media just to sell and who pretend engagement in order to sell, that's visible, and people just turn away from it. True engagement is real engagement. So, go on there, be a part of the conversation, and also decide what kind of brand you want. That's been something that I've been lecturing on and focusing on. It's very easy, especially in these very troubled political times, to use social media as a platform to yell, whether you're right, left, in the middle, whatever. If that's your brand, then your brand is politics. Your brand is not your books. So I go on there and I talk about my books. I talk about other people's books. I talk about comics and movies and all sorts of fun stuff. And I also put a lot of stuff up there that I put a lot of cartoons up. I have a friend, Dan Ferraro, who does the Bizarro.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, he gives me a lot of stuff. He says, "Oh, I think the guy your fans will like this." It's usually something that's smart and funny, maybe a little sarcastic, but never. Because that is an important line. Sarcastic is okay. He is not. I also never put obscene things up. I don't put sexual stuff up.
Jonathan, we're starting to lose you. I'm missing what you're saying here. Is your microphone moving or something?
No.
Whoop, bad connection. Chris, can we get him back? Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I assume you also had trouble hearing him.
I guess it will help if I unmute before I respond. He'll have to come back in,
right?
But I will keep my eyes open for him.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I was also noticing that his video was very choppy too. Is that what everyone else saw?
Yeah, that's what I saw.
There we are.
Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, it still sounds a bit muffled though.
I'm not.
I don't know why.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just lean closer to the mic. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, but it just sounds like you're talking through your hands or something. I don't know why, but we'll keep trying. We'll read your lips.
Where were we, by the way?
I don't know. We were talking about social media and how to give it an audience, but let's move on to another question, which I think this is a good question. Should you be looking at calls for submission and then writing something that fits that submission, or should you just write and submit your material where you think it would fit?
If you're talking about short stories?
Short stories, yes.
The answer is yes. Both. You know, you should be able to write short stories as often as you can. It's good to write to somebody else's call because that way you have guidelines to follow. And it's very important to learn how to follow submission guidelines. I just finished an open call for Weird Tales, in which we got 10,000 submissions. 10,000. One slot. And we got 10,000 submissions for Weird Tales for a recent open call for one slot. And of those 10,000 submissions, more than 8,000 of them were rejected because people did not follow the guidelines. 8,000 times people did not follow the guidelines. So by writing based on published guidelines, it's good schooling for you as a writer. And also, if you have to write in a specific theme, that becomes a nice creative challenge. Stretch that way. One of my most successful short stories, I was asked to write a story for an anthology of Oz films. And, I write, at the time I was writing almost exclusively for adults. I'd never written anything for younger middle grade. And, I wanted to write something horrific and bloody. But no, that's not the audience, though. So I sat down and thought about who the audience is and wrote a story for that audience within the confines of the guidelines. Not only was the story successful, I was, a few months after, contacted by the estate of L. Frank Baum, and they added it to the official chronology of Oz. That short story is now permanently equal to The Wizard of Oz, which, by the way, I ugly cried when I found out.
By the way, you what?
Ugly cried.
Oh.
Yeah, that was pretty emotional. So the fact that I had a stretch in a new direction, I resisted it first, but it wound up really benefiting me. And now I'm one of those writers that I'll try. And if you hit me with a really interesting concept, I'll give it a shot. And I have done some very bizarre genres. And also including a lot of media tie-in stuff that people ask me to write things like Sherlock Holmes or True Blood or one of those other genres. But at the same time, it's a good idea if you have an idea, a story that just wants to be told, write the story, and then go looking for a market. Duotrope, Buotrope, or Raylan.com, RALAN.com. Or just put your genre and the word guidelines into your Google search and tailor that search for, say, the last year so you don't find an old dead set of guidelines and just start submitting. I'm of the belief that you should try to get as many potential products out in the market as you can.
I got another fan type question. Tell us how V-Wars became, how did you pitch it? How did it end up being a series? How did you make those connections?
Well, I would like to say I'm responsible for it becoming a TV show. I'm not. I wrote the original wrote and edited and co-wrote the original 4 volumes. I had writers come in and write field reports during this outbreak. I wrote a 20,000, 30,000 word framing story for it. And I wrote the comic books. So, but when they did first the V-Wars board game, I was not involved in any of that. They hired someone who does board games. And then when they decided to shop it for TV, I was not invited, by the way, to participate. I mean, this is something
that's not unusual, though.
It's not unusual in Hollywood at all. They had the option of project from me and said, if you want to go shopping, it took them 4 years to find a home for it. They'd all been given up, and then Netflix said, hey, we'll do a season of it. However, because of that, and because of the increasing in my currency as a writer, now anytime I have a project I think is a good idea, I give it to I have a film agent now. She goes and shops it around, and with the writer that I have to be an executive producer on the show. And I'm that with several different things. Glimpse has been optioned, and Ruin's been optioned, and Mars One, and a few other things. All of them are optioned with me involved in the creative process now. But I had to buy my way into that club by having something actually somebody else pitched and produced. One of the interesting side effects, though, is once you have something that's either in production or actually on TV, you start getting a lot of reach outs from producers who just want to meet with you, talk to you on a kind of a fishing expedition to see what IPs you have. IP is intellectual property. That is a published book, comic, story, whatever. And I just had one today where they want to have a phone call with me Friday at noon just to see if there's anything that I have that they could use or that they might want to work with. That's an interesting side effect because they're essentially pitching the potential of a relationship to me by reaching out and saying, Look, let's have a phone call or Zoom call or whatever. So I didn't know that was going to happen.
But that's a good thing, because too often Hollywood makes movies based on Hollywood screenwriters who might not necessarily have the same attitude towards their work as an author does.
Well, that's a paradigm shift that's happened because of the rise of streaming services, and also when we went from broadcast to basic cable, you have all these stations that need scripted material. A lot of people thought that cable was going to mostly survive on unscripted shows like contests and so forth. But it turns out there is a dedicated demographic to that. But there's also that a lot of people who want scripted shows. So USA Today and HBO and AMC and all that exploded by giving us quality scripted shows that maybe push the envelope a little bit. And as a result, you have more and more opportunities opening for writers. The downside of that is that with all these new shows, the money that the writer makes for selling a show is less than it would have been before. So it's not like you sell a TV show, you can now go buy your Malibu mansion. That ship sailed and the iceberg sank. But I mind you, it's good money because generally we don't have to do anything except say yes and cash some checks. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I'm crying. It's a first world problem.
Tell us about some of the people you got to meet in Hollywood since this has started. Just a few little short stories before we go on to other questions.
Sure. Well, I mean, the entire cast of viewers and Ian Somerhalder, who's a great guy. He and I Skype a lot, or FaceTime a lot. He's a goofball. He's smart. He's got the right ethics. I love the guy. I love his wife. Nikki is fantastic. But also, I've met everybody. Benedict Cumberbatch. I've met John Travolta, who wants to play the lead, the boss in my Joe Ledger thriller series.
Mr. Church.
Yeah, we're all like, really? Danny DeVito, who I played poker with, and Kevin Eastman, the co-creator of the Ninja Turtles, who's a buddy of mine. Stan Lee and I became pretty close friends, which was a lot of fun before his death. The actors, all the stars of Rocky Horror Picture Show, the original movie, Tim Curry. I had fun having beers and laughs with Jeff Goldblum. All of this is stuff that's freaky to me. I mean, I'm in this world, and it's freaky to me. It's just nuts when, when an actor reaches out. Like the other day, I was on Twitter talking about audiobooks, and Lou Diamond Phillips reached out, and wanted to talk about him maybe reading one of my audiobooks. I'm like, well, that's weird. And then Mira Sorvino, the actress, Academy Award-winning actress, contacts me to say she loves Glimpse, my novel. Okay, So when I went into this, I never expected any of this to happen. It was not even on my bucket list of I want to hobnob with celebrities. They're working stiffs too, looking for their next job. So when Mira Sorvino, Michael Rappaport, the guy who played the Punisher, John Bernthal, when they start reaching out to become friends, or friending you on social media, it's because they're also looking for their next gig. And you as the writer are the source of IPs that the writer is now king of Hollywood. It never used to be the case. The writer is treated like royalty because we have the material that builds great shows. And in fact, I remember the first time I had something like that happen. This was the second season of Game of Thrones was just on, and I was at an event. It was DragonCon in Atlanta, and this guy walks up to me, looked familiar, and I wasn't quite who he was. Slight accent. He's saying, "Oh, I read several of your Joe Ledger books. Found them really fascinating. If they're ever doing casting for it, if I ever get a deal, please throw my name in there." And it was the guy who played Jaime Lannister on Game of Thrones. And I didn't realize that. He gave me his card and he walked away because I actually didn't remember what the name was. And I turned to a friend, who's that? And they're like, and my friend is dying because she loves Jaime Lannister. I'm like, that was Jaime Lannister? Holy crap. So that stuff just happens. It's really weird. But it's, what happens is with that, the celebrities that you idolize come down off their pedestal. They're just folks. They're much more down to earth. I've met very few Hollywood types who kind of put themselves on pedestals or expect to be treated that way. One of my closest friends is Jerry and Janet Zucker. Jerry directed Ghost, Airplane, all those films, and his wife Janet is doing a movie with Spike Lee right now. And I go to house parties at the place. They've optioned some of my stuff. This is the surreal part of this.
Well,
But it then becomes ordinary. By the way, it does become ordinary too.
Is that one of the reasons you moved out of Philadelphia, or?
Well, I moved out of Philadelphia for a couple of reasons. Some personal stuff. My son moved to San Diego, so we wanted to be with our son. Also, I get really tired of very hot summers and very cold winters. In Philadelphia, I did a whole bunch of those. And if you've ever been to San Diego, you don't really need to ask that question. But yes, I wanted to be able to drive to Hollywood. It's 2 hours north of us. So I just hop on the 5 and I'm there in a couple hours. That does matter because I can go up and talk to agents, and go up to take meetings with producers or stars and so on, and go to some of these house parties where a lot of deals are made over cocktails. And it's a good environment to be in. So, yeah.
Another couple questions having to do with like the virus and all that sort of thing, social distancing. Is that going to show up in our books in the future? Do you think that's going to be something people are going to want to write about or read about?
Sure, it's still showing up in my books. I'm working on a novel and a novella. And in both books, COVID is an element in the story because this is a mile marker in history. It would be kind of weird to ignore it. So I'm not. And it does also create interesting plot points. Not that I'm making COVID a bioweapon, targeted, used by the bad guys, but it changed the fabric, the architecture of our lives. So naturally, it's going to have to play a part in it. There will be books written about the COVID thing. There'll be books written about social distancing. I imagine a whole wave of romance novels set dealing with social distancing. I anticipate a lot of these things to be a factor. I doubt that doomsday books with COVID are going to be popular, but books where COVID is part of the life of the characters, yeah, it's definitely going to be a book.
In your Joe Ledger series, you've always sort of had them take place in the current world in some ways. I mean, I although you never named the presidents, it was obvious which presidents were involved at the time. You actually had your team off camera sort of had something to do with bin Laden's death. So I assume that's what you're doing with this.
Yeah, I mean, the current Joe Ledger novel I'm writing takes place starts in Romania, then moves around Europe. So what I've been doing is I've been talking to people who live there and getting insights into how their country, the life in their countries with COVID, and then looking forward to making some sociological and cultural predictions on how life will be in 6 months or 9 months. The book I'm writing will be out probably in the spring. So by then we'll have gone through probably 1 or 2 cycles, maybe 1 or 2 more cycles of COVID, and we'll be bracing for it to come back. So there will still be some social distancing habits that we'll have, and people who defy those habits because they find it inconvenient to be safe during a frickin' play, which doesn't.
Here's another question. How does your formal education contribute to your creative writing? Do you find yourself purposely including hyperbole?
First off, I went to college to study journalism. Hyperbole is not a huge thing there. I was going to try to be the next Bob Woodward or Carl Bernstein. The things I learned in college and in high school reflect also the things I've been self-educating with too, which is, I understand the classics. I understand how literature fits into the landscape of our cultures and global cultures. I've learned good research habits from journalism school. I've learned good work habits from that. But in terms of languaging, I've never tried to write as if I'm a color reader because it comes off as obviously deliberately pretentious. And those writers are easy to spot a mile off. They're somewhat laughable, and I'm not the audience for that kind of pretension. So no, I'm just going to I'll pick the words, the stories, or whatever that fit the way I write. Now, that said, there are skills I learned by studying creative writing, and I never took a creative writing class in school, but I taught myself by learning what the elements of style were, and then studying on them myself and looking for how they were used by different writers that I admire. I don't think you need to be a college-educated person to write. Yes, education is great. I'm a big fan. But I'm also a college dropout. I dropped out of my senior year to take care of a family member who's dying. I never finished, never got my degree. And that's not been my career.
I think it's interesting that people in our generation, because you and I are the same age, class of '76, yay. I also started off as a journalism major because I also wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. I switched to political science, but it's something about that generation growing up with
we were
Watergate.
graduating only a couple of years after Watergate. Those guys were superheroes.
Yeah. Yeah, we all wanted to be them. What are you reading these days? What do you like to read when you're relaxing?
Well, I'm really big into audio when I'm relaxing, audiobooks. I currently listen to the latest John Sanford mystery. It's Masked Prey. Is the name of it. Reading a bunch of graphic novels, going through Rick Remender, his Black Science space opera series. I've got all 9 trades of that and going through it. Absolutely loving it. It's marvelous stuff. Mostly when I'm reading print, it's going to be for research. I read a ton of magazines for politics, science, global cultures, and so on. And I read a lot of nonfiction books. My leisure reading is almost always audio. And also, the other thing I do when I'm reading print is reading submissions for different things, anthologies I'm editing or magazines and so on.
Yeah, tell us about the new magazine that you're working on.
Well, I'm the editor for Weird Tales.
Which is an old magazine that you brought back.
Yeah, it's 100 years old. It's about 100 years old now. 2023 will be 100 years. It's weird horror, weird fantasy. It's not straight horror. It's it's weird. It's had a lot of different incarnations. Some really great, like during the Anne Vandermeer run, which was brilliant. Some really bad, where they're embarrassments. And when they asked me to, first they asked me to write a story for it, which I did, for the return of it. And then after I'd submitted the story, they said, you want to be an editorial director, meaning help curate the magazine. And I said, well, what do I help? And they said, basically curate the magazine. So I picked all the rest of the stories for the issue, one of which just won a Bram Stoker Award by Victor Laval. Then they said, well, we'd rather have you as the full editor, so the next issue I'll be full editor. Right now, we're doing a soft launch. We were hoping to have 3-4 issues a year, but the financial backer died. Not COVID, but old age. And someone who's a lifelong fan of Weird Tales died. So we've been scrambling to line up new financing, which we're doing, by the way. So our next issue should be out in July, and it's packed with great stuff. And it's weird fiction, poetry, and artwork, and it's a real honor to be part of something that was the most important magazine for this in the last century. So
and one of the problems, as you were mentioning earlier, is that you put your guidelines out for exactly what kind of stories you want, and everyone ignores them. So anyone who's here, attendees, if you're interested in submitting to Jonathan's magazine, read the guidelines.
Yeah, here's another thing too. Spell the editor's name right in your cover letter. I know my people want to put a Y in the middle of my name. It's not there, and I do notice when you put it there. And I won't read the story either, because it means you just aren't paying attention.
When someone is putting out a series, if they're self-publishing a series, how important is it to get each book out quickly, or is there a time limit, or does it matter?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer the question. I know a lot of folks who do self-publishing try to get them out pretty quickly, but I don't do self-publishing, so I can only tell you what I've seen other friends do. Scott Sigler puts out one of his new Football League books every couple of years. My friend Jennifer Rose, she puts out a book about every year. But I have also friends who put out a very short book, 60, 70,000 words, every couple of months. It's really up to you. When a lot of books come out quickly, I do wonder how much time has been paid, how much attention has been paid to the quality. And that's kind of an important thing for me. So it's quality over quantity always for me.
How do you define your genre when it crosses over several? If you're trying to sell something, it's a mystery, science fiction, fantasy, horror? Do you have to pick one if you're trying to sell it?
Usually what will happen is my agent and I will talk about it. She'll tell me which of those genres is making the most money. So
Well, for us who don't have agents, let's say, for example, or
well,
some new writer, how would we pitch a book that we don't know how to categorize?
go look at the bestseller lists and see what they're calling the books that are on the bestseller list. Like Stephen King's books are always going to be suspense or just general fiction. But also, you read the trades. There's a lot of like Publishers Weekly. If you can't afford to read it, go get it from the library, or have a couple people chip in to get a subscription for it. They do an online version. Get some of the free newsletters that are available, and follow what's happening with trends in the trade. Like, for example, much as I love steampunk as a label will never make money because it's been proven not to be a saleable genre. So when I wrote my steampunk novel, Ghost Walkers, it was alt history. Alt history does, in fact, sell. Weird West sells pretty well.
That's what happened with my novel, Big Stick. We promoted it as alternate history because it wasn't going to sell as steampunk. Although I tell people it's steampunk who I know.
Yeah, I tell the fans when I meet them and when I'm doing signings, because I love steampunk. I love the genre, but I'm not going to call it that. And right now I'm doing this wilderness. It's called it's a Audible original series. I'm doing 3 30,000-word novellas. It's science fiction. The genre is actually science fiction horror, which is a known subgenre. Aliens is an example. Science fiction horror is a subgenre, but science fiction is the bigger genre, so we're calling it science fiction.
Well, one of the problems with using science fiction as a genre is that it doesn't really tell you anything about the story. It tells you the setting. It doesn't really say whether it's a horror or a comedy or anything.
Right, which your use of other genres, other genre tags come into play when you're pitching it to an agent, when the agent's pitching it to the right editors, and in the jacket text. Jacket text will define, because the jacket text for Wilderness will, in fact, the word horror will definitely appear in there, because it does deal with monsters, but it is the framework of it is science fiction. Just as, by the way, Frankenstein is a science fiction novel that has horror elements. Jekyll and Hyde is a science fiction novel that uses horror elements. I Am Legend, same thing.
Question here about point of view. What factors go into your decision making when you make point of view? I'll point out that the Ledger series uses both first person and third person at various times.
It does. I like the first person point of view if the character is, if the emotional journey of the character is a really important part as the character perceives it. So I'll give you 2 examples. In Joe Ledger, he's psychologically fractured. So his perception of how he brings his own damage to work with him every day, and how the work he does, being a spec ops shooter, impacts his view of life, his how dense his optimism, and how it tries to make his cynicism overwhelming. Those things I thought were best told from his point of view. But every other scene in the books where he's not there, I switched to third person point of view because I want to be able to have other characters' stories involved, but they're often omniscient point of view. So I like being able to dig a little deeper in there. For my Benny and Moore series, my Rotten Ruin series, it's third person point of view, but it's kind of a deep third person point of view. So sometimes we do get inside his head, just not always. There's times I don't want to, because I don't want his perception to give away too much of the story. So I want to be able to dial back on it at times. And as far as point of view within say ensemble cast stories where there's a lot of different characters, whichever character knows the least about the scene and is most likely going to be able to tell the reader information without it seeming like an info dump, I'll pick that character's point of view.
Those least, you say?
Yeah, because they'll be discovering it and therefore, can comment on it, whether as a deep person point of view or whatever. Whereas somebody who already knows it, commenting on it is like a, as you know, Bob, sort of moment. And we don't want to do one of those moments. So the character, I did a book, Ghost Red Blues, my first book.
Mm-hmm.
There were 3 different storylines, but when they all collided, the character who knew the least about what was going on in the moment that he was coming into, a fight where his girlfriend was being attacked, he didn't know what was going on. So his shock and surprise, his growing understanding, became the most interesting point of view. But I did actually write it from 3 different points of view first to see which one felt best.
When you write, do you go straight in an order, or do you sometimes write the ending first and then aim for it, or what kind of direction do you do?
Yes.
Yes.
Uh, well, I generally write the first chapter or two, then I jump forward and write the ending, and then I back up and aim at that ending. However, I do allow for the story to change in the telling, which might necessitate that ending being scrapped and or rewritten. So, I just found that if I write the ending first, I'm less likely to write stuff that doesn't belong in the final draft. If I don't have an outline, I'll wander all over the damn place. So, especially now that I'm writing 3 novels a year plus 4 novellas this year and comic books, I don't have that time to waste. So it's made me much more efficient, and I also am a little more satisfied because I don't get confused about what belongs in the story because I have that formula of cause and effect that that's what an outline is, and I have an ending I can kind of shoot for. Sometimes I'll just write the epilogue and not the actual dramatic finale. I'll just write the epilogue because that's kind of where you tie up loose ends.
Mhm.
And I want to leave some loose ends that I really have to figure out how to get there so that they can be as interesting as I've teased myself by writing.
Do you think, I just lost my train of thought. I had a question. Now I forgot it. So I'm going to read this. We only have a few minutes left anyway. If anyone has any other questions, type them in now. If you do a series, when you're promoting it, is it important to number them? Should they be in any order, or does it matter? You don't do that with yours, as far as I can see.
Well, there are different types of series. There's episodic series, like James Bond. His books weren't numbered because each one is a standalone. Just happens to have the same character. Some plot follow through. So with Joe Ledger, each book can be read out of order. If you read them in order, they're more rewarding because we see the evolution of characters. But the actual story can be read out of order. Whereas something like Harry Potter, they numbered because it was chapters in the battle against Voldemort. So they kind of had to follow that. I know that there's a debate in publishing, traditional publishing, as to whether to number books, because sometimes if they know a series is numbered, they may wait until the entire series is finished before buying it. With trilogies, that's very common. My Ghost Fairy Blues trilogy, it was published without saying book 1, book 2, and book 3. I resisted that. I didn't win the argument. It did make each book sell better, but it also frustrated people who bought the second book thinking it was a standalone. So I like numbering series that need to follow a specific chronology through. I don't like numbering the books in the series that are just ongoing, like the Spencer novels or whatever. They're just simply the next chapter in that guy's life. Let's follow what that is.
When you're trying to sell your first novel, is it important to make it clear to an agent that you can write sequels to this?
Yeah. The phrase I like is a standalone novel with series potential. That is a golden phrase to use in a query, because they're resistant a little bit to buy a book that requires the next book, like a book that has a cliffhanger, because they don't know if your books are going to sell well enough for them to justify publishing the next one. Just because they love the first one doesn't mean that the book will sell. And there was a guy, James Caan, not the actor, a writer, who had done a really great fantasy series. I really loved it, but only 2 books ever came out because the first one did okay, the second one didn't do well. They didn't publish the third, and we were left hanging because of cliffhanger. Until eventually he self-published the third 25 years later.
Wow. Questions about comic book writing and how much different that is from writing regular books. I should mention, while I have everyone here, that in a couple of weeks I've got Mark Waid and Peter David are going to be here talking about writing comic books. Yeah, you know those guys?
I know Peter really well. Mark I know by reputation, but Peter's, I've known Peter forever.
Oh, Peter's a great guy. I've been friends with him. Mark Waid and I went to high school and college together, believe it or not. We played Dungeons and Dragons together, so it'll be nice to see him again. But back to the question. How is writing comic books different from writing regular books?
Okay, well, first off, it's more of a committee process. I mean, yes, you do pitch the idea. Yes, you do write the script, but the editor is very involved. And in the evolution of the comic, once the script is turned in, the artist will often have a lot to say about it. Also, sometimes the letterer and colorist will too. So it's a very collaborative. It's kind of like a mini movie being made because the cinematographer and lighting guy all involved in that. And also, you have to be very brief. You have to imply more than you say. One of my first comics, I had written, really, really loved my dialogue back and forth. The characters had a nice Marvel Comics banter. And the artist said, at some point, would you like them to actually be able to see the art behind the word balloons? So what I do is I tend to overwrite my original comic scripts and then dial them way back. It's, by the way, you can go to my website, jonathanmaberry.com, it's not my name right, and there's a page called Free Stuff for Writers. There's a sample comic book script up there. But the editor is very involved. Everyone else is very involved. There's a ton of emails go back and forth all the time. And you know, that you should listen to the other people, because even though it's your idea and your script, it's a visual medium. And that visuals, the art, the words, you know, actually the word balloons, and the coloring all have an impact on that story being successful. So you do want to listen to these other professionals when they offer advice. Sometimes they'll suggest completely different art than you put in your art direction in the script, and you know, you might want to listen more often than you say no.
You were doing, if I remember correctly, you did Black Panther comics for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I was the regular writer on Black Panther for 2 years. I also wrote Captain America, The Punisher. I've done Avengers and Wolverine stuff. I've done Marvel Zombies. I've done a bunch of different Marvel projects, about 6 years worth. And then I did something for Dark Horse Comics. Then I went to IDW where I did V-Wars. Now I've just signed a contract to do something for DC Comics that it's under a non-disclosure agreement, but it's going to be a whole bunch of fun.
All right. One question someone asked is Pandemica coming out soon?
Well, the fifth issue, the final issue? Yes, we hope so. The first 4 issues were out, and then a global pandemic halted the release of a global pandemic comic book. The irony of that's never going to go away. And you know, it also tells you how it ends. So, you know, it has that final act that we currently don't have with the real pandemic. It is scheduled to come out now that Diamond Distributors, their staff is mostly back to work. They have new safety procedures to allow that. Some comic book stores are opening up again, so it'll be out probably in a few weeks. And the trade collection of it will be out in June, I believe. I think that's what it's scheduled for.
All right. Well, we've gone an hour. I appreciate you coming and helping us, Jonathan. And we really do appreciate it. Everyone, jonathanmaberry.com you can go to. Thank you, Jonathan, for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Wear your masks.
Do you have any other final comments you want to say before we leave, other than wear your mask?
Well, actually, just, you know, the one bottom line for all of this is, you know, if you're not having fun writing, you're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So always look for the fun way to do what you're doing, because, you know, even if you're writing dark stuff, the writing process has to be fun. So please go find the fun.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody. We're going to end the recording now, and then I'll post it up online for everyone. Thank you.